go live. We are live, I hope. Hope that the preview is not showing what it's showing. Okay, sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, we had some technical hiccups. Let me tell you, it's not a good idea to fire up OBS after 1 month, 5 minutes before you go live. You might have a conflict in your NVIDIA drivers and then start sweating to make it to the live.
Yeah,
With that,
make sure you have your AC on.
hey Daniel,
Hey
how are
man,
you
you doing
doing?
all right?
Yeah.
Pretty good. You enjoy your vacation?
Yeah, it was too short. I would say happy to be back, but that would not be entirely true.
Yeah, we
But
got a packed episode here. We might go a little longer than normal.
yeah, yeah. So we missed one episode. So and even though that we did not went that far away in history to find what we're gonna talk about, we still have a very packed episode. So what to expect today? We're gonna talk about Dark.IoT. So it's a botnet that was discovered in March, and that botnet is introducing new vulnerabilities, or better, new exploits based on vulnerabilities pretty fast. So Daniel will cover that. We're also gonna talk about a new world record DDoS attack. It seems to be that every episode we have a new record there. You have to start the DDoS Olympics soon. Then we're gonna talking about DDoS. It's pretty much a lot about DDoS, but Hotcobalt can also be under. So Cobalt Strike that can be attacked by a denial of service. DDoS-for-Hire press release. Yeah, and I'm not gonna talk about what it is. Let Daniel give you that surprise. We will also talk about leaks in the cloud, and that will be towards the end. Microsoft PowerApps, easy to use apps, or better, easy to develop apps. If it's easy, there must be something else that goes wrong. So we're going to talk about a leak that's in there. And then also a list that has leaked from the FBI, but we'll come back on that later. We'll not focus on the leak, by the way. We will focus on how it was discovered, which is probably more important than the leak itself. And then there will be a pretty big episode or a part that will talk about censorship middlebox weaponization. So a new paper that came out from academics from the University of Massachusetts and another, I forgot the other university. They did some great discoveries about how to weaponize middle boxes on the internet. So boxes that are there for nations to censor access to the internet, but also ISPs that are selling commercial services such as protect your kid, do not go surf on social media or on porn websites. And those boxes actually can be used to create very big DDoS attacks. So we're gonna discuss how this works and try to give a more clearer picture than the paper itself. The paper is well written, but it's still difficult to understand what really is happening. So we try to bring it in a more for dummies way, I would say, not for dummies, but the way that I understand it at least. So and then there will be and yeah, we will start with Mozi. Mozi got arrested. But then again, Mozi is back. So Daniel, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of us are familiar with the Mozi botnet at this point in time, but just kind of recap. The Mozi botnet is a peer-to-peer botnet, and it was first reported by NetLab in December 2019, but I think it was first seen by them in September 2019. For a long time, it's actually accounted for a majority of the internet traffic. So there's a couple different outlets that were reporting that Mozi was consistent of about 80 to 90% of malicious IoT traffic at some point. I wouldn't say it's about that high right now, but it's still very active. I would say, up there probably in the 50, 60% range. It does account for a majority of the events that I see in my honeypots. And it's distributing an ELF binary. So there's mainly two that we see. There's Mozi A, which is an ARM binary, and there's Mozi M, which is a MIPS binary. And this botnet spreads via the use of known exploits. So there's about 6 or 7 exploits that it uses to propagate these binaries, but also uses telnet brute force. So what that's going to do is just basically look for routers and devices that are online with weak credentials and attempt to run several different combinations of passwords and usernames to see if they can get in, and then also download the binary onto that device. As C2, comms use a distributed hash table DHT, which is similar to the activity that we saw with IoT Reaper and Hajime. And Pascal, do you have anything you want to add about Hajime, or?
Oh yeah, so those that are using distributed hash tables, which is pretty much like the way that torrent works. So it's a peer-to-peer way of communicating. These are very hard to take down because there's no central infrastructure. The only way to take them down is from inside. So you need to be able to hack into the communications, which is typically encrypted and hard to access. But if you can get inside, like what the researchers did for Hajime, then from the inside you can take it down. But otherwise, there's no way of taking that thing down. And even if the guy is arrested or the guy goes away, this botnet is built fully distributed, which means that he can search, every bot can search for new devices. Once they find devices, he will leverage other bots to download the malware and infect that device, and it just goes on. So then they keep communicating. So it's like a breeding thing that you cannot take down unless the guy who altered it brings it down. So even if the guy goes away, this can go on for a long time. And we have seen that with Hajime. IoT Reaper was gone faster, but Hajime has been out there for a long time, and we still see some remnants from Hajime coming into the honeypots. And Mozi is actually
pretty amazing.
Yeah, and Mozi is the one that why I had to turn off all my honeypots before I started the stream, because otherwise I would not be able to have a decent stream. So I get like hundreds of thousands of hits per day of Mozi. It's very aggressive.
Yeah. It brings me to my next point about how aggressive this botnet has been. As I said, it accounts for a majority of the malicious IoT traffic that we see in our honeypots. And here's an example of the traffic that we've seen over the last year. As you can see, there's dozens of hits and dozens of events that we see every day. It's a fairly large and distributed botnet, but for the most part, it's very centralized, China and India. A lot of times you see it breaking out and affecting parts of Europe and America. But for the most part, a lot of the events that we see are coming from places like China and India.
Yeah, we talked about this in one of our episodes back in October, I believe, where we saw that most of the Mozi was in China, and then it moved to India because of vulnerability in modems from an Indian cable operator was discovered, and you saw that this whole point that was on China moved to India, and then as they patched it, it just moved back to China. So it's like a living organism that's out there and that's moving around. But yeah,
it's definitely a tit for tat fight.
Yeah, but as you said, the majority of devices that are infected are coming from China.
Yeah. So a couple other little things about Mozi. Mozi evolved from 3 different sources. Very popular sources that we've covered over the past couple of years. And the capability that Mozi had and has currently is payload execution. And so what that, when there's a brute force attack on a device, and it successfully gets access to that device, it can actually download the payload and execute on the device. So there's payload execution. It also has DDoS attack capabilities. And on top of that, it also has data collection. Data collection is kind of minor prior to the next event we're about to cover, but basically what it would do is it would pull information about the local device that it infected and report it back to the operator. One of the interesting things about this is it blocks outgoing TCP traffic, and we'll talk about this with Dark.IoT. It's something that you see across the board with a lot of, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but more script kitty plus.
You mean outgoing or incoming TCP traffic? I think it's incoming, right? So it's blocking off the ports. Yeah. So it's blocking the telnet port, blocking the SSH port.
It's a list of about a dozen ports.
Yeah. So
ports that would...
the common ports that are used by other IoT botnets. It's like isolating itself. But we will see that in the Dark IoT, as you said. They are trying to clean or to take over the bot. So they start killing processes to make sure that no other bots are there if they have names of competing processes. Mirai also did that. Even based on port, they will go search for whatever is a process that is listening on port 23 for Telnet, for example. I'm going to kill it. And then I'm going to spawn, or better, create a socket on that port so no other process can take that port. So I own it, so nobody else can log in. So that's like protecting that device, because we know there's many bot herders out there, many botnets. There's lots of fragmentation, so they're all fighting for the same resources. Even though there's a lot of them, there's still a fight going on to have the most. They want hundreds of thousands, preferably more bots in their botnet, so they're all fighting for those devices.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I wanted to call it out inside Mozi is because, like you had said, we see it inside Dark.IoT, and you know, back to the point I was trying to make is that, you know, ScriptKitty Plus, that these kids out there, the operators out there, they're a little bit more advanced than they used to be. Yeah, and oh, got a little bit of issue here.
No, we don't have an issue. The issue is me.
Yeah.
With one. Okay, there we go. See, that's an online patch. Fixed YouTube.
From disclosure to patch within seconds. So yeah, one of the reasons why I want to bring it up is basically that a lot of the botnets that we're seeing today are starting to step up their level of sophistication and trying to harden their infrastructure to prevent takedown, but also prevent other bot herders from taking over the resources, because there, as Pascal said, there's a very limited amount of resources out there. So the interesting thing about Mozi that I want to get to is that NetLab 360 disclosed in July that the author behind Mozi had been arrested. They didn't disclose where in the world the author had been, but the author was arrested in July 2021. This is kind of an interesting thing, because I've been looking into and running around, because Mozi came back. Like, there's been an update. 30 days after the arrest, researchers, I think it was at Microsoft, noticed a new variant of Mozi floating around. So this was kind of interesting. They had added a new module to the botnet. It was the man-in-the-middle module that allows DNS spoofing and HTTP hijacking. So this is kind of like where things get interesting with the botnet as far as surviving the takedown. I like to kind of draw a parallel and a reference to like Japaris and Mirai. So when an author creates the source code or creates this malware package, it's released to other people, and other people have access to this. It might be sold, but once it's out in the wild, other authors have the ability to repackage and distribute that. So what we're looking at here in the situation is that the Mozi author has been arrested and been taken into custody, but the source code still exists out there with other operators. So the campaign is not coming to an end. So you can look at it like Mirai. There's several different variants of Mirai out there, like Dark.IoT, that we'll cover later. And we're looking to see the same thing starting to appeal with the Mozi campaigns, that we're starting to see that there are other people out there running it other than just the author who created it. And so what we're seeing with this new update is that they're targeting Netgear, Huawei, and ZTE devices. One of the interesting things is that they also updated their modules to survive a reboot. So now it has persistence. And so when you go up to like a 36,000 foot perspective, you start looking at Mozi starts to have some of the same characteristics. I won't say exactly the same, but as a Motet and TrickBot had at the very beginning when they were banking Trojan. This Mozi botnet is gathering system information. It's reporting it back to the operators. It's very difficult to get down. It can download and execute payloads. Very interesting branch to see that maybe at one point in time, what Mozi might be able to do as far as distributing payloads further into the enterprise network. And when you look at the devices that Mozi has been updated to target right now, you're definitely looking at more serious devices on the internet, devices that you could definitely run man-in-the-middle inspections and get more information from. It's targeting high-value systems. So definitely something to be aware of and something to watch as Mozi evolves and moves forward.
So basically what you're saying is that the only organization that knew that Mozi author was arrested is Chinese, and that while everybody thought that Mozi was going to go away, they surprised us after 1 month after the author being arrested that Mozi is back, and Mozi comes back with spying technology targeting higher value systems.
It seems to be a recurring theme. Law enforcement goes out and they arrest the person that was behind the creation of said malware. but malware was distributed and given to everybody. It belongs to the streets now because it's public, and other people are using it.
Yeah, but Mozi was not in the public, right? Mozi source code.
Well, it's not in the public, but I'm definitely sure that it's being distributed within private actors. I mean, if Mozi is still being updated when the author is in custody, that means that there's other operators in the group, correct? It's the same issue as the TrickBot takedown. I mean, you can arrest certain key figures and you can take down infrastructure, but unless you're willing to cut the head off the snake and take everybody out, they're going to reform. There's, like I said so many times, there's too much money on the table for people to walk away. So with Mozi being one of the most prevalent botnets out there, just because the author behind the source code was arrested doesn't mean the rest of the people in the operation and campaign are just going to walk away. Even the event with Jaw Pars, it wasn't just him. You know, there's Joshua White and all kinds of other people that were involved with him in the creation, the spread, the distribution. You know, it's not just a one-man operation normally.
Yeah, or the author was ordered to hand over the keys as he was taken into custody.
Well, yeah, and that's another real possibility is that, you know, depending on where this person was and where they got arrested, you know, my asset becomes your asset type of situation. So, you know, it's very concerning if this person has lost their botnet to someone else too.
Yeah, so we need to keep an eye on that one. He has been around for quite a long time and didn't do anything bad until now. Now it becomes, it might be.
Yeah, there's only a
concerning.
few companies that reported minor DDoS attacks here and there. But for the most part, Mozi's been in a growth development phase, not an attack phase.
Yeah, well, growing it does. I can affirm that.
Yeah, you definitely got to grow. So this is another one that we want to talk about, the DDoS Olympics, I guess you could call it. Claim to fame, whatever you want to do it. But there was another world record DDoS attack that was announced. It was Cloudflare reported that there was a 17.2
It's in a different
million...
category, right? You have different categories in the DDoS Olympics. You have like the ones who shoot the highest, the one who throw the furthest.
Exactly.
Because some talk about, oh, the highest volumetric attack with that many terabit per second, and the other, oh no, it was so many packets, so many millions packets per second. So this one is about requests per second. So HTTP gets per, yeah, pretty much HTTP get per second.
So, I mean, really not much to talk about because, you know, of course, it's not our research or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of put it out there because, you know, news is news, and especially when down to DDoS, this is kind of something to note to the general industry. So in the summer of 2021, a financial industry, someone in the financial vertical was targeted on the Cloudflare network with 17.2 million requests per second. The interesting thing about this is that the attack was only about a 30-second burst. So if you look at the top chart, it shows the actual attack, and it came in just a simple one big burst. I mean, within a matter of seconds, all of a sudden they were hitting 17.2 million requests per second. I think Cloudflare in the report said that their network on average handles 25 million requests per second. So very, very, very large attack. It came out of nowhere, and they said it came from 20,000 bots. So just kind of give you an instance. What was it? Our boy, our friend Daniel K. How many was he going for? Like 900,000 in Germany or something like that?
Yeah, well, he had 400,000 as he was promoting it on XMPP back in October, and then in November there was the Deutsche Telekom incident where he tried to infect the modems, the residential modems of Deutsche Telekom. But he failed, so the modems rebooted, but there was 900,000 modems that were affected. So he could have been looking at a 1.3 million, but he's the one who took down Liberia, by the way. So yeah. he did a DDoS attack on a cellular operator in Liberia, and oopsie, Liberia couldn't handle the load, so he took down the whole country with it.
Yeah, I want to bring that up to highlight like the difference in the evolution of botnet and construction development, because, you know, at one point in time, as you said, Daniel K had 400,000 bots, and this was only 20,000 bots that created this attack. It's pretty impressive, and as Pascal's going to get to a little bit later, the DDoS Olympics might actually become a very real thing with people going for high score left and right. And as more information is disclosed, I think there's going to be more problems in the future. But one of the things that Cloudflare talked about in this report is that the botnet, this specific botnet with 20,000 bots was seen launching this attack, was seen 2 weeks earlier launching dozens of 1 terabit per second attacks. And, you know, just a year or two ago, we had not seen one. You know, it was big news when we saw one. And now it's like, oh, we saw a dozen 2 weeks ago. It's not that big of a deal. The evolution is growing. People have bigger hand cannons, and this is something that we all kind of need to be aware of as we move forward with the new attack vectors that are kind of coming out.
Yeah, even in the evolution of IoT devices, people get better residential internet. If you get better residential internet, that means that your router is connected to a larger line, so there's more potential to use that router as a bot. So 400,000 bots back 3 years ago is a whole different number today because, yeah, people have upgraded their internet lines and they have more capacity to use them. And the only thing that saves us a little bit there is that there's lots of competition. So after the Mirai botnet and the code was made public, many took that code and started building their own botnet. So they started much more actors out there, much more botnets, and all fighting for the same resources. So there's much more fragmentation. But we saw back when the Mirai source code came out in the first couple of months, well, you had Daniel K, who was good with source code and who wanted to do something with Mirai, and he was one of the first. So you see that he was able to amass 400,000 bots. 400,000 botnet today, you don't see that so often. It's very exceptional when it comes around, and it must be using either a 0-day or something exclusive that nobody else knows. But if a new vulnerability comes out, we will see it with Dark.IoT. Everybody's on top of that vulnerability, try to exploit it as fast as possible, try to take as much vulnerable devices as possible, and then protect them from other bots coming in with the same vulnerability. So it's a race out there, and luckily for us, because that makes the botnets more fragmented and there's more smaller ones. So we see more attacks, but not bigger attacks.
So Pascal, let me ask you this. Are there other devices out there on the internet that could be leveraged to launch bigger attacks than IoT devices?
That's a nice bridge. I guess so.
That was a good setup for you, right?
Yeah, perfect. So talking about devices that can be abused and that are sitting in high capacity environments, nation state censorship, Middleboxes, web filtering boxes in ISPs and in front of large universities that have big bandwidth connectivity. Those are interesting devices. Now, question is, can they be weaponized? And that's what the paper from, and I need to see, who is it again? University of Maryland. Yeah, I need to give credits to the people who deserve it. And the University of Colorado. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's in your backyard, Daniel.
Yep. If there's one thing that Colorado is known for, it's packets.
So they wrote an award-winning paper, and actually the research already started last year. So they have been working on this for over a year. But the paper was published very recent, like 1 week ago or 1 week and a half.
Yeah.
So, and what they disclosed was a way to abuse TCP to generate massive DDoS attacks. And they did that by finding a flow in Middleboxes, how Middleboxes are deployed and how they're working and how they're assuming things. And they can leverage that to do, first of all, spoofing, so they can attack a victim from an attacker using spoofing, which is typically difficult in TCP or impossible beyond a simple one-packet attack, and also amplify it, but amplify it with factors that are way above memcached. And everybody remembers memcached, more than 50,000x amplification.
So
yeah, so they found actually thousands of IP addresses on the internet that have an amplification factor that range from thousands up to 100 millions. Actually, they don't know if it's 100 million because they hit some infrastructures where there was like an infinite loop going on, and they monitored it for weeks, but then they stopped monitoring because, yeah, they needed to stop somewhere, but probably it might still be going on, it's like an infinite loop that was happening. So we're going to talk about all these different use cases in a second and try to explain how this loop is there, how it works. But also hundreds of thousands of IPs provide an amplification factor over 100x, and more than 200 million IPv4 addresses could be abused for the attack. And yeah, if you stay until the end of this section, you will see that actually to do the attack, it's not difficult. It's pretty simple. You don't need a lot. You need resources and information, but well, the information is out there. The links are there. You can just download all the. It's academic research, so it's shared with everyone. So it's pretty much a potential for happening right now. Now, before I get into how this works, I'm going to build it up step by step. So I want to start talking about reflection and amplification. We already talked about this, but remember what UDP amplification is. So you have an attacker, he uses a UDP protocol, preferably for a DNS, NTP, or a Memcached server. So a service that can be abused to, based on one request, send much bigger responses or replies. Now, UDP, there's no connection involved, so it can easily be spoofed. So what the attacker does, he will send a UDP packet, and instead of using his own IP address, he will spoof it with the IP address of the victim. So he sends it to the server. The server will reply to who? Well, to the source, to the IP in the source of the request packet. So he just switches source and destination, and he replies to the destination, which is the victim. So a small request for a DNS list, for example, or asking for an object in Memcached, it's a small request, and the server will send a big reply, but instead of sending it to the one who asked for it, it sends it to the spoofed victim. So that's how we do UDP amplification. TCP, you can do pretty much the same thing, but in TCP you're limited because TCP is connection oriented. So what you can do in TCP is you can spoof the source IP as a hacker and send a SYN, and then the server will reply with a SYNAC, not to the attacker, but to the victim that was put in the source IP of the spoofed or the forged packet. Now, behind Daniel's head is something that can impact. So what happens sometimes, companies are deploying sensors, and when they see SYNAC floods coming in, they say, oh, let me put that on the block list, because that's an attack that's happening. Now, if the attacker is smart, he can use a box in the middle, so a reflecting device that's here in the middle, for example, google.com. And if he uses google.com and there's a SYNAC stream coming into this victim says, oh, google.com is attacking me. Let me just blacklist google.com. Now, anyone that's in this company from the victim that tries to go to google.com will be able to reach Google, but Google tries to come back, but it's blocked by the protection device that's here. And that blacklisting can go, or blocklisting can go far, because it can actually go up to central spam. Like Spamhaus can have that entry in. We have seen that happening, where sometimes attacks like that just go very high up the range, and you get blocked very far away in the internet. So it can be dangerous for that. Now, another thing that can happen, there's some servers out there that are reacting, or that are not following the normal implementation or following the RFC. And this is also the problem with those Middleboxes, by the way. It's not really a flaw, it's just like, it's not an oversight, it's just, yeah, so an assumption that people make to overcome certain problems. So there are FTP servers that are out there, and that was proven in a paper, Hell of a Handshake. It's a paper that came out from a German university a while ago. And there are servers out there like FTP servers. When you send a SYN, it will respond with a SYNAC. And typically you will go back with an ACK, and then the connection is established, and then data is being passed between client and server. However, some FTP servers thought, oh, I'm going to accelerate that process. A little bit like prefetching data on a disk, for example, because they suppose if you read the first 10 blocks of data, probably you're going to read the next 5. So you prefetch that data already before the actual program is trying to read it. Well, they do the same thing with their FTP server. So you send the TCP SYN, they respond with an ACK. They're not a SYNAC. They're not waiting for the final ACK, but they're already starting to stream data to you, like the hello banner. So in a telnet can be the hello banner. In FTP, that can also be a banner that they're sending. So they already start to streaming data even before the ACK comes in. Now, suppose an attacker is spoofing the source IP. He sends a SYN. This one forwards the SYNAC to the victim and now starts streaming data to the victim. So there you get amplification. So you can get amplification with TCP, but it's limited, and there's only a couple of software implementations out there that are allowing it. Now, let's go watch at what an HTTP request response is, and you probably missed the whole animation. I've been working for hours on this slide deck yesterday to put in all the animations. So how does a simple HTTP request response work? So you have a client and a server. The client will send the SYN, the server answers with SYN-ACK, ACK from the client, and then the connection is established. Once the connection is established between both of them, you can send an HTTP GET and you get an HTTP response, and then you will have a FIN packet that is sent to tear down the connection if there's no more use for the connection. Now, what happens with a spoof three-way handshake? So when you have a SYN, the attacker can spoof the source IP of the victim in that SYN packet, send it to the server. The server will reply with a SYN-ACK to the victim. The victim will say, hey, what the hell is this? This is not for me. And he could send a reset. And sending a reset will tear down the session on the server. So connection is not established, and the victim received a single out-of-state SYN-ACK packet. And by responding with a reset, the whole thing is over. Now, spoofed TCP amplification. I already talked about the way with the FTP servers, but there's also a separate thing about TCP and in the RFCs that can amplify a little bit the number of packets that the victim is receiving. And that's when the attacker sends a SYN, so spoof the source IP of the victim. The server will answer with a SYN-ACK. Now imagine the victim doesn't want to reply with a reset. So he just drops the packet and stays quiet, which is typically not a bad thing to do. As we will see. But he just drops the packet. So what happens on the server side is like, hey, you're not answering. And so he will retransmit. Try again. Hey, did you receive my packet? Maybe it was lost along the way. And he will keep insisting. And that can go on until the max retransmit. And some of the servers out there transmit like 100 times. So you have like a packet amplification of 100 times. It's fairly slow because there's a whole timeout there. So it can take like a couple of seconds between every packet. But if you have enough packet and enough reflectors, and do we have enough reflectors? Well, the whole internet is your reflector. Any device on the internet, any router, even my router at home and your router for sure, has been involved in TCP reflection attacks. We saw that back in 2019, in November 2019, where some actors were using all the devices around the internet, and they do that to hide, to make it more difficult to detect the source of the attacks. So it's like the whole internet is attacking that one victim, but actually it's all reflected from one central server or a couple of central servers. So in this case, you get a little bit of amplification. Now let's switch gears and let's look at how Middleboxes work, because it's important to understand how a Middlebox or a content filtering device works before we can understand what is the problem that the academics discovered. So you have a client and a server. The server is hosting some content, a web page. The client wants to access that web page. But in the middle, there's a transparent box that is monitoring all the traffic and that is looking at if traffic is appropriate or not. So we sent a SYN-ACK, so that's between the client and the server, but the Middlebox is already watching and monitoring. The Middlebox sees, oh, there's a connection established here between that client and server. Okay. So now the client wants to go to youporn.com. That's offensive, says the Middlebox, and the Middlebox says, no, you are not allowed to go to youporn.com. So I'm going to block your request. That's what a content filtering Middlebox typically would do, right? You want to prevent your kid from surfing to youporn. Well, you have a Middlebox that can do web filtering and that provides that for you. So they're searching for certain keywords that are in the HTTP GET request. And if that keyword hits, they will block. They will not just block. What they will do is, if they're nice, I'm going to go down. If they're nice for the server, they will send a reset to the server side so that the server knows that, okay, this connection, I can forget about it. If they don't send the reset, the problem becomes that if there's lots of requests coming in, the server will have a lot of sessions that are hanging there and that have to time out, and this can fill up the session table of the server. So typically what a good Middlebox should do is send a reset to the server to inform him, hey, don't expect further packets from this guy or for this session. So the server can remove the session from his memory and continue processing other requests. Now on the client side, the Middlebox will send a response in the name of the server. So it's like the Middlebox is not there. It tries to be transparent. So it will respond in the name of the server. So on the same session, it will send a response with a web page that says access blocked. Now this web page contains images, contains text, is much bigger than the SYN packet that started here. So that is one of the characteristics that can be used in that attack. So this is how a content filtering Middlebox works. Now we are in high-speed internet. The internet is redundant, we all know that. So there's multiple paths to get to a destination. And there's also such things as load balancing to make sure that you have enough bandwidth, so you balance it across multiple service providers for redundancy, for capacity. So there can be asymmetric routing. So now assuming that a Middlebox sits somewhere, if it's a nation sensor, well, it gets a lot of traffic, so it sits on multiple points, and packets can go into the country and go out to the country in another way. So they need to monitor all these things. So they need to make assumptions about the sessions being established. So, and there comes the problem. So when my client sends a SYN to the server, the SYN will go through the Middlebox, the server will answer with SYN-ACK, and then the client will answer with an ACK, and then for the server session is established. However, the Middlebox, you see there's two Middleboxes, and the SYN went one way, and the SYN-ACK got routed another way, and the ACK also. So this Middlebox didn't see the full three-way handshake. However, so that means that if there's another packet coming through, that Middlebox will say, oh, that's not a valid session. However, it is a valid session because it just was routed in another path, and he didn't see that. So this Middlebox will make an assumption. He sees a SYN coming in, oh, and he immediately will assume session established for this client and this server. So he makes that assumption that the session is established. Now there's a SYN-ACK going back, there's an ACK. The ACK comes in the box, says, oh, there's an ACK coming, so there must be a three-way handshake that is terminated here. So I'm also going to assume session established. So both boxes now are assuming that a session is established between client and server. So now the client will try to go to the server. Any of both routes is good because both Middleboxes are assuming that that session is established. So there's no problem. He goes to social network Google+, social network not allowed. He will block it, and he will respond with a page saying, hey, access denied. And on the other side, send a reset to the server, and the server can remove the session from his memory. So far, so good. Still following, Daniel?
Yep, definitely following.
Good stuff. Now, what happens if we spoof a SYN followed by a push ACK? And a push ACK is like the get packet. So 2 packets the attacker will send. Now, we start with the SYN. So we spoof the SYN. So we send a SYN. We give it the sequence number. Every packet has a sequence number, and that's important because the servers are counting sequence numbers to make sure that it's your packet and that it's not arriving out of order. So you need to have a certain sequence number. So suppose that the SYN has sequence number X, and that's what the hacker just puts in. It's a random number. The source is V, so he spoofed his source with the victim's IP address, and the destination is the server. So he goes through one route. Session is established for this Middlebox because he saw a SYN passing through. Now the server will receive it, will send a SYN-ACK to the victim. Okay. Now he immediately sends a second, so the attacker immediately sends a second packet. And now it's a push ACK packet. So typically what you would see if you have a SYN-ACK ACK, after that you have a push packet or push ACK packet that is being sent with the request for the resource or the website. So in this case, this attacker sends a push ACK. He needs to make sure that the sequence number is the same as SYN but +1. It's the next packet. That's the only thing that he needs to take care of. And then he spoofs the source with the victim, and the destination will be the server again. And then he's asking for an offensive web page so that he can trigger a response from the censoring Middlebox. So this goes out, censoring Middlebox sees this packet. Oh, that session was indeed established, but now I'm getting here a request for uPort. No, that is not allowed. So let me respond to that guy and say access is denied. Now, who is that guy? Well, I find it in the source IP. The source IP is V. So as a Middlebox, I will send a reset to S to the destination to the server, and I will send an HTTP response to the victim. That's Daniel in this case.
Yeah, no, I was trying to move here. My
yeah, try to play the victim. Yeah, play that. So the HTTP response will go to the victim, and that will be a page, a HTML page with images, with tags, so pretty big response. So 2 packets here, a SYN and a push ACK, that are spoofed, can result in a bigger web page that is sent to the victim. So that's how this Middlebox amplification works. Now, what are the most effective triggers? And there's websites out there, censoring websites, and I will talk about it in a second, where you can find research. So there's, how they're called again, Censoring Planet. They are continuously scanning the internet, a little bit like the IoT scanners, but they are scanning for sensors and sending keywords to different websites to see when sensors are blocking and not. So they keep a list of all the keywords that certain countries are blocking. It's fairly interesting. You can click on a certain country and see what are the typical keywords that they block in this country. And then you can click on another country, like there's a big difference between what China blocks and what the US typically blocks. Now the US is not blocking
on. What you're saying is it's an amplification list.
So yeah, they are keeping track of a censoring list, but the ones who are most popular censor keywords are actually the best amplifiers, right? So these are the top 5, and there's a 6th one, example.com, that they found out by accident. So the researcher said, okay, we're gonna also put in another URL. They put in example.com, and it triggered a lot of sensors actually. And that's probably for testing maybe. So whoever deploys that sensor wants to test it. Okay, let me go to example.com and see if my sensor is working. But yeah, pornography, gambling, social media, file sharing, sexual health education, everything that we're concerned about that our kids cannot see will make the list. Everything that a company is concerned about that employees will do at work, very good to make that list. And things that students should not be doing in universities, also good on that list. And then all the things of politics and weapons in certain countries where they want to filter that.
All the things that you as a citizen should not be doing. Yeah. Does not want you to do.
That depends on geographies, right? But that also makes the list for sure. Yeah. So that is part of the problem, actually. Now they also found out there's certain mega amplifiers. So and there's 2 categories of mega amplifiers. One is a self-sustaining mega amplifier, and the other one is victim-sustained. Now in the self-sustaining one, it's caused by routing loops. Now you might say, well, routing loops from the internet. If you have a routing loop, it's not a good thing. Well, the internet is full of routing loops. The internet was designed not by one person. You know, there's not one person who has the whole map or how all the routes are working or how they are laid out on the internet. And a loop is not, so here I made like a graphic. So here's a loop between 2 routers that you will not see on the internet, of course. But imagine you have 28 different routers managed by 10 different companies. Well, there might be a routing loop between a certain combination of routers that is out there. I'm trying to stick inside my okay, yeah, inside the box. I need a bigger green screen. Working on that. So there are routing loops out there. Now, typically a routing loop will be limited by the packet's time to live counter. So every packet in the IP header, there's a TTL field. It's 1 byte long, so you can have 255 as a maximum number in there. And every hop it takes between, for every router it makes, we call that a hop. For every hop it takes, the router will subtract 1 to the TTL. If a router has a packet where the TTL drops to 0, he will drop the packet. That's to make sure that the internet is not, the packet is not infinitely going around on the internet. Because can you imagine somebody who sent a packet in the 1980s and is still running around there? After a while, the internet becomes unusable because we will have to invest in bandwidth to have all this packets routed there. Or we have to open a link and wait for a timeout to drain all the looping packets around there. But I'm digressing. So some are limited by TTL, but researchers also find out that some were infinite. Now imagine a middle box here. So the middle box sees that packet passing through. The middle box can be completely passive and say, okay, I take the packet, I change nothing on the properties, and I just forward it. more or less like monitoring and just deciding to forward the packet itself or drop it and reply and send another packet. Or the Middlebox could say, like a proxy, I take the packet, I construct a new packet and send it to the server. Now, if a packet comes in, it will have a certain TTL. So assume that it's passing 10 routers here before it comes to that box. Then the TTL will be dropped by 10. It's 245. If he forwards it, this one gets 244. This one forwards, this one gets 243. And the number goes down. And after 240 loops, it will stop. And there will be no more amplification. Now, in the case that this Middlebox reconstructs a new packet, he will get the packet, reconstructs a new one, and puts in a TTL of 250, or even a TTL of 20 might be enough. If it's enough to sustain the loop, that packet will loop indefinitely because the TTL counter is reset every time it comes through that Middlebox. Now, what happens if a packet loops? So the attacker, as we saw before, sends a SYN and then a push ACK with an offensive request, and this sensor will send to this victim, hey, you have no access there. Now, the same packet loops through the sensor and sends it, hey, this guy is still trying to access stuff here. Okay, I'm going to send it again. And then again, the packet loops here. Boom, again. And again, the packet loops. Boom. So it's like, if you have an infinite loop, this can go on for weeks. And that's what the researchers found. So whenever this sensor gets that packet, it's get like re-triggered. It's like it forgot all about the history of what happened before that he already sent it. He just keeps on sending it. So and that's what a mega amplifier does. So that can be caused by a routing loop. Okay, those were exceptional, but still, then there is victim sustain. And this is caused by an RST response by the victim. So remember that when the attacker sends a request for an offensive website, he will reply with, you cannot access, but he will reply to the victim. Now the victim receives a packet that's out of state. The reply, that HTML, those HTML packets, the victim never established a session. So the victim might have a firewall or another stateful device that says, hey, that reply that I get here, there's no connection. This is out of state. So I'm going to send a reset to the server. So he sends a reset to the server, but the box sees a reset's coming. And the box says, hey, my friend, no. I told you not to go there. So he sends back the denial, you cannot access. And this one gets, again, packets out of state. So he sends another reset. And no, I told you already, you cannot access. So sending him again, access denied. And that's like, yeah, the victim is like sustaining by keep on sending resets. The victim is sustaining the amplification that is coming down on him. Now, how big are those amplifications? And that is where the whole worrisome things are starting. So remember,
the internet?
Yeah, remember we talked about DNS amplification. So here for reference, so this is the amplification factor, and this is the number of IP addresses that can be used with this amplification factor. So if you look, for example, DNS had an amplification of about between 50 and 100. So it's right here. It's a logarithmic scale. So between 10 and 100. So here's this DNS. If we follow DNS, there's like what? A couple of, it's a million? No, less than a million. So maybe 800,000, 600,000 IP addresses that can, 600,000 sensors that can be abused to have the same amplification factor as DNS. With NTP, you're 10 to the 5th, 10 to the 5th, that's 100,000, yeah. 100,000 of those can be abused with same amplification as NTP. Now memcached, remember 50,000 times amplification, over 100 devices, so it's about 300 I think, can be abused to have the same amplification level of memcached. And it gets worse because remember those self-sustaining amplifications goes like in the millions or beyond millions, hundreds of millions. Luckily there's less IP addresses, but they have very high amplification factors. So you see the range. There's so many IP addresses out there that can be abused with different levels of amplification. And that is what becomes very worrisome. So this is a graph from the paper. The links are down in the resources. If you look at the links, you might want to read the paper, but I would suggest first look at the YouTube video. There's a recording of the presentation that they made at the the Usenix conference. So look at that YouTube video first. It explains very well how it works, and those graphs will be coming back. So if you want more information, just go there, have a look, hear it from somebody else how they explain it. They explain it very well in the YouTube, and then read the paper. If you do it this way, the paper will make a lot of sense. If you don't do it, it's harder to follow the paper. Well, at least it was for me. Your mileage may vary. So mitigation of Middlebox amplification attacks. What does it mean? Is it a problem? No, it's not immediately a problem. From a victim perspective, the attack looks like out-of-state HTTP response. You're just getting packets, TCP packets, that are from an HTTP response where you never initiated the request. So it's just out-of-state TCP traffic, but it's volumetric, so it can become a very large volume. So if you can mitigate large volumetric attacks, you're good. Existing technology is good to do it. There's no evasion of the mitigation of DDoS solutions. So that means that from a DDoS perspective, you don't need to be scared. You will be able to block the attack. However, the evasion happens at the sensor level, and that's where the whole thing is. With that sensor out there, do you have to be scared or not? And yeah, I'm going to come back to that in the next slide. Now, the other thing that we would say, it's better not to respond with RST to out-of-state packets. Now, it's again, it's like you have to outweigh the convenience and the potential to be caught in that amplification loop. And it's not only for this amplification loop. There are other, if you send a reset, sometimes that can also cause, whenever there's spoofing, the RFC for TCP has been set up for an ideal world. That means that client and server are behaving the way they are supposed to behave. Because yeah, there's an interaction between both of them. If one of them is malicious, things go wrong, right? So is it good to respond with reset? Well, if you not respond with a reset, then you might have that timeout and packets coming back to you. That is one thing that could happen. If you respond with a reset, then you can have that amplification like in this case, which is much worse. Now, another flip side of not responding with RST is when a legitimate client is making a connection. And imagine that the client sends a SYN, and then he waits for the SYNAC to come, but the SYNAC for some reason is dropped. Maybe not on the internet, because the internet is not dropping a lot of packets, only a few. But imagine that the buffer on the card of the server or the firewall or whatever that was sitting at the client side just dropped the packet because could not handle it in time. So the client never gets that packet, so there somewhere there will be a timeout. So if a packet is lost, it can be that a client is sitting there and waiting for a timeout, maybe sent another packet and then waiting for a timeout while the server cannot send a reset. If the server can send a reset, he can immediately say, hey, this connection is going wrong, you have to resend. So the client knows immediately, okay, I'm gonna tear down my session, gonna create a new session, and now it goes faster. So it's between like having a locked client and the perceiving like a long timeout on the client side. That reset might help in case that you have lost packets, but it doesn't happen that often. So I would say I would not a big fan of responding with RST, because you're saying that something is there. So the less information you give out, it's like with phishing emails. Don't respond. Don't send unsubscribe when the phishing email says to unsubscribe, reply with unsubscribe. You're basically telling the phisher, oh, this email address is active and somebody's listening, so I'm gonna hit him harder. Okay. So never reply to something that you should never get.
Yeah, don't talk to strangers.
Now, the reasons for concern about this problem. So first of all, when they did responsible disclosure, so they contacted several certs, they contacted manufacturers of censoring boxes and nations that have that problem. Now, you would say, well, we can just patch the device and then all the problem will be solved. However, patching the sensor, remember, it's because of that asymmetric routing. So you have to make it symmetric. If you need to make it symmetric, well, you need to have sticky load balancers somewhere. and which is easy in the use case that I put on the screen. But imagine that the sensor is from a nation, and it comes in a one way of a country and then passes 24 routers and different ISPs before it comes to the data center where is the server, and then it goes out through other ISPs and goes out on the country. How can you make that sticky that it always goes through the same sensor? It's nearly impossible. So there's pretty much not a lot to do except for maybe consolidating all the access to the country on a single line, which will be another problem. Now the attack is also relatively simple, so it only requires 2 forged packets. Now there's no POC code published, but hey, even the way that I explained it should be enough for most people with affinity in bots and in programming and in networking to build a POC from that. You know, it's only a SYN and a push ACK. You forge the sequence number. You put in an offensive name. So it's about, you need to find the offensive names. Well, you go to censoredplanet.org, and there you will find many effective URLs and keywords. You just have to put the top keyword, take the top keywords from Censored Planet. You're off to the races. Now you need to find Middleboxes. Well, the researchers published on their GitHub the code so that other people in the community can look at this problem and further investigate this problem and further research what can be done. But at the same time, they published a scanner, so it's a fork of ZMap that they put online, and all the source code is available with the instructions how to build it and the instruction how to run it and a Python script how to analyze the result and get all the IPs that are effective Middleboxes. So the information is all out there. So somebody could already start a couple of days ago with trying to do this attack. And there's not much that we can do. We are relying on those sensor devices. So there's an increased risk for more and larger volumetric attacks. So there's not really a risk of attacks evading your detection or your protection. But the risk that is out there is that we can see more volumetric attacks. And not only more, but also much, much larger ones. And that's where the kicker is. Those nation-state sensors and ISP web filtering systems, those are in high bandwidth connectivity places. Those are not in a place like my modem at home that has a 100 megabit per second residential link on it. Well, if you infect my device, hey, cool, you can amplify through my device to 100 megabit per second. But now imagine a nation-state sensor that sits on a 1 terabit per second link. This can amplify a lot more. And knowing that there's hundreds of thousands of systems that can amplify about 100 times, I think that this provides enough potential to, at some point, saturate many links of many ISPs and countries and maybe even break the internet.
Well, definitely I see in the future. I mean, as we said, the DDoS Olympics are right around the corner. You got all these people claiming large attacks. You have people stepping up their sophistication operations. Doesn't look pretty for the future, does it?
Yeah, I'm so sad. I think we should stop here, no? No. Okay, with that said, we will find a solution. Don't know how yet, but
maybe we'll attack the attackers.
That's maybe a good suggestion.
Captain Segway today. Oh yeah. So this one was kind of an interesting one that came up. Another one. So Hotcobalt is a Cobalt Strike DOS vulnerability. This one was kind of interesting in my opinion because Cobalt Strike is a little bit of a problem lately. I know it's a legitimate tool and it's used by red teamers to secure network infrastructure, but that tool's fallen into a lot of the wrong hands. Don't want to point fingers at who's responsible for all this happening, but
well, if it's effective for a red team, it can be effective for other people, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can generally understand the idea that they don't want their tool to be reversed and signatures created or exploits found. So I get that to an extent, but I think at some point in time when a tool like this is being leveraged so heavily, specifically by ransomware gangs, that is it really helping the community or is it hurting the community? I'm not going to answer that question because that'll take forever, but it's something that we kind of need to consider. But anyways, back to Hotcobalt. It was CVE 2021 36798, which is multiple DOS vulnerabilities inside Cobalt Strike. And basically what it is, it's a memory exhaustion inside Cobalt Strike server. So what you can basically do is launch a simple DOS attack, resorting memory exhaustion inside of a Cobalt server, not the beacon. By knocking that beacon off and causing service degradation, the beacon, you can DOS existing beacons. So when you DOS existing beacons, you can prevent, you can disrupt current operations, but you also can prevent the installation of new beacons as well. Of course, this exploit has been disclosed and has been patched by Cobalt Strike, so it can't be really leveraged too maliciously. I'm not telling people to go out and DOS things without permission, but you know, I guess a weird point that I want to make about this is I'm willing to bet that the criminals have patched their Cobalt Strike servers quicker than red teamers, but I don't have any proof of that. But it would be an interesting one to look at for sure.
It would be interesting to know how fast they react on a vulnerability and how long it takes them to patch compared to
if
real
I'm making
businesses.
$5 million per victim, I'm patching very, very quickly.
So the question is then, who will be affected if people start DOSing those Cobalt Strike sensors? The ones that are using it for legitimate, probably.
Yeah, it's a weird question there, because like you could DOS these beacons without really impacting legitimate business use. You'd only be disrupting either a red team engagement or a criminal engagement. So I think stopping both is a win, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So just wanted to bring that up. It's, you know, another DOS vulnerability and problematic situation with ransomware at the moment. The ransomware operators are using Cobalt. So I think that we're going to start seeing more things like this come up in the future. Also, thank you to Sentinel Lab for some awesome research here. Keep doing good work. This was the one that I really want to talk about. I thought this one was really strange. I'm always trolling the internet looking for new things that are popping up related to DDoS-for-Hire. And I was kind of shocked to find that they had put out a press release. You know, I wouldn't say like super shocked, but you know, it's typical for these booters and stressors to use Google ads to advertise their services. And it's something I've talked about many, many times before. I think it's a very interesting situation that either they're using some kind of free coupon or they're actually paying Google to advertise their services. But either way, it's an illegitimate service. I know they like to argue that they're a legitimate service, but they're definitely not. So in this case, we had this specific one, ep.13, did a PR release to Digital Journal where they want to be a little braggadocious, talking about their growth as DDoS and higher and how things are moving. One of the things I found really interesting was that they had copy pasted information clearly for this because they had not cleaned up their information. In one of their quotes, they talk about their stressor service, stress them that TO that's now a defunct service. But later they go on and talk about IP stress. So obviously the person that filed this PR report is definitely associated with these two groups. And if you even go into IP stress, this booter itself, you'll see that they've consolidated several different booter and stressor services down into this one service here. And they felt the need to advertise it. So they put out a PR press release, which is weird.
I can see that one of the key spokesmen for the company was quoted as saying, why didn't they put the name of the spokesperson? Typically in press releases you have the name, you say CEO and then the name of the CEO, no?
Yeah. We'd all like to know their names, and if you run IP stress and you're mad that I'm talking about this, please come contact me. I'd like to talk to you about your service. And if it's legitimate, we can have a conversation about it.
But do they have contact information? Yeah.
Well, you know, on the next slide, I'll get to, you know, why I have this point about I want the person to come talk to me. Because in general, when you go to these sites, there's some kind of verification when you register for an account. Can you go to the next slide, Pascal? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I thought so. I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So here we actually have IP stress. We've gone to their website and we've actually looked at registering. I have an account on their site to look around. But this is what I found was very strange, is that when you go to register for an account, you don't need an email, phone number, anything like that. You just create a username and a password, no verification, no nothing. You're right on into it. They only accept Bitcoin. And one of the funnier things is over here is they talk about that you're protected, that all attacks are untraceable. Totally legitimate service, dude. Way to go. IP stress. I find it very funny, but you know, the other thing I found funny is that most of these stressor services are protected by Cloudflare. And, you know, kind of going back to the original conversation earlier about Cloudflare claiming the largest DDoS attack, it's, well, kind of protect them too. And the interesting thing is, like, what information could one pull down to send to Cloudflare for abuse report, right? So here you have a spoof website, you have spoof information. There's literally no information that I, as a researcher, can obtain to send to Cloudflare and say, hey, this service is abusing. So it's one of these weird situations. A lot of people say it's a honeypot and they're gathering information. After 5 years of hosting all this stuff and not taking it down, and I say 5 years is because on our last TRL, I think we talked about one of the longest running services was TS3 Booter, been online for 5 years. You know, we had a huge increase in booter and stressor services over the COVID pandemic that are all protected by either DDoS Guard or Cloudflare. So, you know, I find it strange. I do really find it strange that these services are totally illegitimate, offering illegal services, utilizing DDoS mitigation services to protect their own website, but also advertising on their own website that they can bypass those services. So, you know, it's a very weird world that we live in when it comes down to denial of service attacks and how some of these people can continue operating. But this is a very strange one, and the fact that stressor services can not only use Google AdWords but now are using PR press releases, I think is a sign that, you know, we've kind of let them go too far, and that we really need to crack down on them. I think Cloudflare needs to drop all the booters and stressors from their network. DDoS Guard, I think they're a little bit more criminal, so they're not going to do it. But in order for us to clean up this environment and prevent them from running away with it, we need to be a little bit more heavy-handed, and we need to not give them so many avenues and resources to continue running these businesses. So I kind of look at like places like Google to stop allowing them to do these things as well. But it is what it is. The industry still moves forward, but
yeah, well,
it's always criminals. It's, you know, going back to the Cobalt Strike, it's criminals are always finding legitimate tools to abuse, right? So I mean, I'm not just trying to harp on Cloudflare. I'm just saying, like, in general, that these criminals out there are just sitting around waiting for us to either post a POC or to exactly, you know, put out infrastructure and resources that they can use, and that's what they use. And it makes it very difficult to go after them when they're abusing legitimate tools such as Cobalt Strike, you know. So
yeah, even in DDoS amplification, they're using DNS, they're using NTP. Those are legitimate services, nothing wrong. They're using censoring boxes. Somebody put up a censoring box. Well, now they can abuse it.
Yeah, so it's a tough one.
If we would stop doing legitimate services, there will be no more illegal services. Yeah. Okay.
You know, you make a funny point. Like, yeah, you take Cloudflare, you take Cobalt Strike, you take all these things away from criminals, and they're just going to go find something else. Like, even if Cloudflare were to remove all the DDoS stressor and booters from their network, they're going to go to DDoS Guard. Yeah. You know, it's just more or less the question I bring up is, like, what intelligence are you gathering by having on your network? And what good are you doing? You know, hosting a service for 5 years on your network, I think you're aiding and abetting at this point, but I'll leave that up to the FBI to make that decision.
Okay, time to move to the next slide.
Yeah. the other rant that I want to go on, Dark.IoT. No, I'm just kidding. It's not a rant. So Dark.IoT is a new botnet that we've named and that we've gone out and we've published a report about. And I just kind of want to start connecting the dots, as I like to do. So Dark.IoT is a botnet that we actually saw in February of 2021. It was first publicly disclosed by Palo Alto in March. And so the botnet that they had disclosed at the time was not named. It was a new botnet that was kind of on the market that was going around infecting IoT devices and all that other fun stuff. So the interesting part that Palo Alto called out in the report is that this botnet leveraged two CVEs, 27561 and 27572, within hours of disclosure, which is really, really impressive. I mean, it shows that these threat actors are not exactly sophisticated, but they're capable. They're capable enough to sit out there on known sites, looking for disclosures to quickly leverage them into their botnet, and that's what they saw, and that's what they report on. They also report that the botnet was seen testing 5 exploits and 3 unknown vulnerabilities, which is something that we continue to see throughout the campaign. And another thing that I want to call attention to, and also go back to the Mozi topic, is Palo Alto had disclosed that the shell script had special commands that were deleting folders and running a kill-all process before downloading the payload. And this was a defensive mechanism. So basically it's removing the logs, and also it was removing competition. Specifically, it was looking for a competitor bot herder that goes by KTX. And so it's removing any KTX infections that was on the system so it could reinfect the system itself.
Yeah, if the guys who wrote Dark.IoT are listening, it's totally useless, guys. You're copying the source code from Mirai. Mirai has a bot killer routine that does all the stuff that you're doing in your shell script. You should.
Yeah, you also want to fix your cron jobs if you're listening to us too.
Yeah. So killing, running the IP tables command. Mirai does it. No need to do it in the shell script. So before you copy paste, first think about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And as
researchers and criminals need to think about this.
Yeah, and your cron jobs, that's not the way that cron works. You should read the fine manual, RTFM.
Yeah, but needless to say, they as unsophisticated they are, they are still, as they say, script kiddie plus. You know, like they are out there leveraging exploits much quicker than any of the other bot herders are out there.
Script kiddie sharp now. C++ is pretty old. C sharp.
Kiddie sharp. Yeah. All my friends are gonna hate me after this. So the interesting thing is, once it runs these parts of the shell script and downloads the binary, the binaries are all Dark.architecture, so Dark.arm7, Dark.x86, and so on and so forth. And then into the shell script, once again, like Mozi, it's blocking incoming. I think we got this one right on this one. We don't need any editing. It blocks incoming traffic, just like Mozi does, as a way of defending and protecting itself. So this was a really cool kind of report that Palo Alto put out. Like I said, it was in March of 2021. But then in August of 2021, Juniper put out another report about an unnamed botnet with very similar characteristics. So Pascal, if you can switch the slides.
Sorry, somebody said something on the chat and I was operating the chat.
No, you're all good. Earlier, my monitor was having issues, and that was why I was paying attention. We're doing it live.
Yeah.
So Juniper put out another good report about this unnamed botnet that was seen leveraging CVE 2021-20090 2 days after disclosure. So, this is a pattern that was being set, that these operators were literally leveraging these exploits and these POCs that were published within hours to days of disclosure, which is very fast for a bot herder. So 20090 was a vulnerability that was disclosed by Tenable, and it impacts the Arcadian, I think I'm saying that right, firmware. So that firmware was actually used in over 24 vendors' IoT devices. So it would be what we call a supply chain issue or supply chain vulnerability, because it trickles down, right? So one person is impacted, but that impact goes down to several other manufacturers. I know there's huge debate about the word supply chain.
Oh yeah, no, that is only me. After the Orion
no, everybody
thing, I hear supply chain everywhere. Everything has become a supply chain vulnerability and a supply chain attack in some way.
Hey man, we had a rock slide here in Colorado, and 70 was shut down, and all of our soda and all of our groceries couldn't make it. And I call it a supply chain issue. If I couldn't get my Dr. Pepper, it's a supply chain issue, right?
That's the physical supply chain,
Yeah, so we all deal with supply chain issues in a pandemic in a way. But it's interesting. So, right, the supply chain issue inside the firmware impacted over 24 devices, which is millions of devices also go on the chopping block. As we said, there are limited resources for bot herders to compete against. An exploit goes up, there's millions of potential devices to go take. So first one to get them is, the early bird rise gets the worm. And they also reported the same thing, a similar pattern as Palo Alto had in March, that they had seen the operators testing 6 exploits in this situation and numerous unsigned exploits. So when I say unsigned exploits, they are known exploits that don't have CVEs. Just got a little confusing when we were trying to write that out at first. So very interesting. It showed similar patterns to what Palo Alto was talking about. You have a botnet that's quickly leveraging exploits. You have all the same things that were found inside the shell script. You find all the same characteristics and patterns across the board. Interesting, right? So we're all watching this and monitoring it. And then on August 19th, our researchers, while monitoring the loader sites for this botnet, caught a new binary. And inside that new binary, we found that they were looking to leverage CVE 2021-35395 within, I think it was about 3 days of disclosure, that they had updated their binary and kept it in there. So once again, repeating the pattern since early March of quickly leveraging exploits when they were put up on the chopping block. And this was yet again another supply chain vulnerability disclosure by IoT Inspector Research Lab, which was a very interesting one because this impacts the Realtek chipset and SDK. And the impact goes down to 65 vendors. So, in a matter of the month of August, you have nearly 100 vendors that are impacted by just 2 supply chain issues, putting millions of devices out on the internet, or they already are on the internet, but millions of devices on the internet that are vulnerable for bot herders to go after, and that's exactly what they did. And so we alerted on that, and we posted a report detailing the characteristics of this campaign since February. And if we can go to the next slide there, Pascal, we can show them some interesting things here. Me, myself, and I decided that we just kidding. So back in February, I had originally discovered the first sample that we had picked up on, and it was interesting because it was on this infrastructure that was IoT LMAO.xyz. And this was something that continued to be a pattern throughout multiple updates of the binary. This threat actor happens to use different variations of IoT laughing my ass off for their C2 infrastructure. And so like the current binary, when it infects a device, it's going to make a call and do a DNS lookup to pull the IP address for its C2. And all of this is actually hosted on the same infrastructure. Well, it's owned by Delius LLC, but there's a couple different networks that underneath it that it's sitting on, but everything goes back to Delius LLC. Since February, they've pretty much been solely reliant. They've used, it was 2 other ASNs prior to February, but since then they have been solely on Delius LLC. Which is interesting. When you look at bot herders, they definitely favor bulletproof hosts, and that was something we saw. What was it with Cyberbunker and the Mirai botnets that we're seeing sitting on multiple ASN hosts that were completely malicious. And it was funny. I think it was Bad Packets that talked about when that ASN or that network was taken down within hours. You could see the bot herders moving their infrastructure from one ASN to another, which it's pretty interesting in my opinion to see how quickly a threat actor moves. In a world where we're constantly told as consumers to patch and stay on top of things, I think it's really sad to say that criminals move faster than we do. But that is what it is. And just simple little things as far as I don't even know how to say it, that these bot herders are leveraging infrastructure that we're constantly reporting and trying to take down, but they're constantly moving to other parts of the internet we don't have control of. The whole kind of theme of the topics that we've talked about throughout this presentation is that the internet's becoming a dark place. It's not looking good. The future and the perspectives of how they're going to evolve and what's going to happen in the future, I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah, takedowns have only very limited effect. You take them down and you see them move within the day to the next infrastructure.
TrickBot and Emotet were taken down by multiple government agencies around the world and multiple companies, and they all came crawling back. It's like I said earlier, if you can't cut the head off a snake, you're gonna have a problem.
Yeah, but and even if you cut the head off of a snake, it's growing another one, Hydra.
Yeah.
So the only thing is taking the economy out of the attack. But yeah, we cannot all shut down our businesses, our online businesses, and go away. That's like the only thing that's left to get the internet back on track. And
yeah, but to the extent of what you said, like it would be kind of like this. I always like to make street references. It'd be like the businesses that are running shop on the corner that drug dealers are on. Like, yeah, they've got to stay in business and they can't do anything. The cops can't do anything. And they're in a bad environment. But it's still a bad environment. It's not a good environment anymore. And that was the point I was trying to make, is that at one point in time the internet was all fun and games, but now it's becoming a very serious thing with a lot of consequences, a lot of money on the table. And I don't know if it's a good thing that we have these people out on the block. I think we kind of need to have a stronger enforcement.
Yeah, talking about attackers, let's go to the chat. We have Switch on the chat. Oh, hi, Switch. Hope you're doing good. So Switch is asking, have you heard that the author of Freakout, Necro, is fleeing to Canada?
Huh. That's actually a good, I haven't heard that, but why would they go to Canada? That's all part of US and Western and East. I mean, all of Europe and Western agencies have access to Canada. If you were to flee to Canada, you're definitely going to get extradited. So I don't know why they would go there.
Yeah. I would go to Russia. That's where I went for
Same.
holiday.
Yeah. Yeah, they can't get Snowden. They can't get anybody in the ransomware operator realm. I'm going to Russia, man, if the government comes for me.
Okay, that's enough detail.
No, that's a good question. I didn't know that they're fleeing to Canada, and that's something I have to look into.
But where are they coming from? Either from the US, then most probably, because the.
Oh, if I was in the US, the first step I'd go is Mexico. I wouldn't go to Canada.
Well, Europe would go to Russia. It's the best bet.
Yeah, Mexico to Cuba and then disappear.
Okay, talking about something else than DDoS, talking about cloud, because that's a much better place to be in.
Yeah. Cloud9.
So recently it came out that Microsoft PowerApps, and PowerApps is it's one of those low code products. Means that you can just by clicking you can build your own applications like business intelligence apps, and it's being used with Microsoft Dynamics. So they have their whole ERP system, and then people can build their own apps in organization to get and have access to that information that's in the ERP, which is mostly sensitive information. Now, some of those Power Apps were being found leaking information. Leaking information now by itself, the Power App was not wrong. There was no mistake made. However, Power App uses a API into the database, and there's a table, and Microsoft says it clearly in its documentation. If you want to secure a list that you're using in your Power App, you need to go into the table permissions, and you need to make sure that for those records that you can only display the right things in that table. Now, many companies did not read the fine prints or the fine manuals, and yeah, they put up applications without actually securing all the data. So some of the data was leaked out. So 38 million records were exposed, and it's not small companies, state and municipal government bodies in Indiana, Maryland, New York City, enterprises like American Airlines, Ford, GB Hunt, and Microsoft itself. So it just shows again that the cloud, it's a shared responsibility. We always say, oh yeah, put it in the cloud, it's secure there, and somebody else will take care of my security. Well, it's true to a certain extent. So Microsoft will make sure that your infrastructure is secured. Microsoft will try to secure as good as possible against vulnerabilities. They will put the patches, so the attackers cannot get to your data if they were not supposed to get there. However, same as with the S3 buckets on Amazon. If you put your data there and you put it open to the public, you cannot blame Microsoft for that, right? You just put it there and you put the wrong permissions. Now you can say, Microsoft, please turn down the permissions and make it private by default. That's what AWS did with this S3 buckets. That already solved many of the problems, but still, as a developer myself, I tend to find myself also while developing applications, I don't want my application to break because I don't have permission. It gives me more bugs and more difficulties to find out in my program. So, and sometimes from development it goes into production and people forget to remove all those permissions, and yeah, things like that happen. And don't think that nobody will find it. And I'm talking to you, Mr. FBI.
That's a rough event for them there.
Yeah, so that's another thing that happened in the cloud. So the FBI terrorist watch list was leaked online. It's already a while ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. And it was reported on by Catalin reported on it, Bleeping reported on it. But the person who found it actually found it through Census and Zoomai. So what happened? This FBI terrorist watch list is implemented in Elasticsearch database. So far, so good. That's a good use case for Elasticsearch. Very good. You put that on a server, but then you don't protect the server. That is not so good. So we already told it like so many times. There used to be the idea of, I will put it on a server, slam an IP address on it, and the password is the IP address, because nobody can find that server, because it has no host name, there's no URLs, it's not advertised, so it's somewhere in the deep web, yeah? But hey, don't forget about Census and Zoomai and all the others that are like Shodan. They are continuously scanning the internet. At some point, they pass by that IP, because they're randomly scanning all the whole IPv4 subnet. So they will pass by that server at some point. And when they come by the server, well, Census and Zoomai, they know Elasticsearch. So they're going to extract the information from Elasticsearch, what kind of it. And then it only takes a researcher that gets either a notification, because this guy found it within a day, that on the same day that it was detected by Census and Zoomai. And he went in and looked and saw that it was all the information. Now, the funny thing is that they tried to stash it away in a server in Bahrain or something. So the IP address was located in Bahrain. So was it a stolen copy? Is it a fake copy? Nobody knows. The FBI didn't comment for the reporters. It was taken down, but it took like 3 weeks before it was taken down. So it feels like it was not really taken seriously. Now, I asked myself, even the FBI, if a guy on this list is European, he has rights for the GDPR. So now the FBI should reach out to all European citizens that are on the watch list and tell them we leaked your data. No?
I don't think that's happening. I think when you end up on that watch list, you lose that right.
Well, I'm not going to come and get it. That's for sure. If I'm on that list, that's pretty much a no-fly list, right?
Yep. Yeah, the no-no list.
Okay. So on that note, let me go back to the chat because Switch was back. He said the feds were after him. Well, yeah, well.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a couple agencies that are after him, to be honest. But, if he's in the United States and the FBI is after him, of course, the first move is going to be to leave the United States. So that's kind of telling where he was located and based. But, yeah, that's a tough one to go on and run for cybercrimes. It's
well, depends how big the crime is. If it's big enough, they're gonna find you anyway.
And the Necro botnet's pretty big, so I'm sure there's a lot of dedicated attention into that bot header and apparently their location now. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'll definitely have to look into that. Maybe we'll talk about that in the next TRL about Necros.
If the FBI was listening, first of all, don't put your server out there. And here's a tip: the Necro guy is apparently in Canada. Go get him.
Yeah. Well, if you're the Necro guy, run quick.
Okay, so with that, Russia is the best, lol. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's right, Switch.
Switch. Moi luci duc ete Putin.
Okay, on that funny note, before we share too much more, we're going to say thank you for joining us. So we're again at 1 hour, 28 minutes. So good stuff.
Pretty good.
We had fun. I hope you found it interesting. All the resources about the things that we were talking about, it's in the below. So look in the description. You will find it there. And Daniel, see that on the YouTube, you actually look a little bit ghosty and green. So we will try to fix that for the next one. But it's okay. The content is good.
I'll blame it on a vaccination or something like that.
Yeah. People are not here to see our pretty faces, are they? Well,
No, definitely
at least I don't think so. Okay, so on
not.
that
Oh,
note, thank you very much, and see you next month. Oh, next month we will be earlier because I have to travel end of the month for a conference, so we will be going out in the third week of September, back to
cool.
school, and probably we'll see
Back
a
to
lot of
cyber.
DDoS attacks on schools now. No?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much, Daniel. It was really great. Had fun.
Thank you for having me
And
again.
see you all soon. Bye bye. Okay. We are